Hey, thanks for listening to my podcast. To best enjoy this series, you should start from episode 1 and go on over to brandonheld.com and check out everything my site has to offer. I have the podcast, I have the blog, I offer life coaching, and I even have a little life coaching course if you don't want to talk to me one-on-one, just to help yourself get started. So start with episode 1, go to brandonheld.com. Thanks for listening. Welcome back to episode 2. This is Brandon Held. Life is crazy. And today I'm just going to pick up where I left off with the end of episode 1 and the birth of my brother. What a huge impact that had on me and how to live my life. Before, I was just this kid, going through life, not giving it much thought, and just, living day to day, really. And when my brother was born, it kind of changed everything. It gave me a sense of responsibility. It gave me a little bit more sense of a maturity for my age. Obviously, I would learn later I had a long way to go in that department. And just protectiveness. I already had a bit of a protective nature for my mother and what my mother was going through. But now I had these same feelings and more for my little brother. And, he was brought into this life, this family that, frankly, outside of my grandmother, was not anything to aspire to be like. And, I often make the joke, I grew up on the How Not To book. And it's a joke, but there's a lot of truth to that. My grandmother, who I love very much, Mamaw, she showed me a lot of love. She stepped up and did things with me and my sister, things my mother didn't do. She took us, out to eat. She took us 2 places, Cedar Point, hotels. She did things with us that made us feel loved and like we were part of a family. My mother just flat out just didn't do those things. And maybe it's because we were poor and just making ends meet were part of the problem. She just didn't have anything extra to throw around. We were on food stamps. We lived a life where, we would get our food stamps at the beginning of the month. I can't remember anymore if it was once a month or twice a month. But either way, I remember a period of time, I think it was twice a month in the beginning, in the middle. And we would go to the store and we would buy what we could with the food stamps. And, typically it was me and or my sister walking several blocks to the grocery store, taking the food stamps, buying things and bringing, carrying the bags of groceries home. It's not the only way. I'm not saying my mom never went to the grocery store, but she sent us quite a bit. I mean, heck, we could even get sent to the grocery store with a note saying, my mom was giving us permission to buy cigarettes for her. Times were so different back then. But yeah, just a lazy mom, a poor mom. I loved her, but she spent hours of her life just laying in bed in her bedroom. I remember when her and Ricky would, when he was home, because he worked on the railroad and, he would be gone Monday through Friday most of the year, but there were times in winter when he couldn't work because of the weather. So he would just be there all the time. And I remember they would be laying in their beds upstairs in the home. And, we would be in the house somewhere, and my mom would just call us to come upstairs and have us do anything from, taking her a cup, getting her a drink, to bringing her food, to whatever the case was. She just was an absent mother. She was in her own world, living her own life while we were trying to survive. And so doing that, I felt this need to take care of this little baby boy brother that I had. And I know my sister did too. My sister and I didn't have the greatest relationship. I think we had a decent relationship until we hit the teenage years. I was a little more reserved teenager, meaning like I got along with everyone, but you wouldn't put me in the category of a jock, or you wouldn't put me in with the band geeks, or you wouldn't, put me in with the nerds, or, whatever the different categories are you would lump people into. I didn't fall into any of those because I got along with everybody, right? And my sister was beautiful when she was young. I mean, how could she not be? My grandma was, my mom was, and so my sister was too. And so, she was part of the more quote unquote popular crowd, so she thought she was too cool for her older brother. And that's fine. So, we were just different. We were very different. And so we got along okay, but we weren't like best friends or anything. One of the main things was that I was very big on honesty and loyalty and doing the right thing. Not saying I never made a mistake or did anything wrong, but by and large, I tried to do the right thing. And my sister was just more of, she wanted to be liked. She wanted to be popular. She wanted to do what people thought was cool. And if that meant lying, if that meant breaking some rules, didn't matter. She was down. So, we were just different that way. But we both did have the bond, the common bond, that we wanted to take care of RJ. But even that was crazy, We were kids. You think about it, we were teenagers, early teens, mid-teens. We were out living our life or doing whatever we were doing, minding our own business. And RJ was incredibly energetic and outgoing, still is to this day. Just has high energy, always has. And, he would always seem to make his way out of the house and go to a neighbor's or just take off, even as a young 2, 3, 4-year-old, 5-year-old boy. He just took off, did his own thing. And, many times we would be looking for him, running around the neighborhood yelling, RJ, RJ, just looking for him because he would just take off. And it's not his fault. He just wasn't watched that well. It's easy to do when you have a mother living in her own world and teenagers doing their own thing. And sometimes there were some scary times we really could not find him for a while. And my mom would be crying and bawling and, tears running down her face. And then, of course, we would eventually find him. But do you think that would stop that from happening again? No, of course not. Of course it would happen. It would continue to happen throughout my whole childhood. My family just didn't have it together. My uncles were alcoholics. My stepdad was an alcoholic. Everyone smoked weed, used drugs as well that I just wasn't a part of. And, my mom was in that realm too. I don't know if she was an alcoholic so much, but she definitely did drugs, smoked, did those kind of things that took her away from daily life and being sharp and being perceptive and being the kind of mother she needed to be to take care of her kids. She was just kind of there, making sure we had a roof over our head. And I would say making sure we had food in our mouths, but there were many times that wasn't true. Like I remember coming home from school, being hungry. I ate a lot of cereal growing up, a lot of cereal. But we just had times where there literally was just nothing to eat in the house. At least nothing, prepared that I, a teenage boy, could make. And I would go get a potato and peel a potato and eat a potato. Those memories are real. Those are real in my mind that I survived off of a raw white potato that I would put salt on and eat. And to me, that was my life. That was my normal. I didn't know it was abnormal. But I did know that it didn't feel good. It didn't feel good to be hungry. It didn't feel good to have a week right after we got food stamps to feel good and, eat well and then know like, oh crap, when this food runs out, we're not going to have any more until food stamps come again. And we would, be hungry. I mean, there were days where, the only real meal that I had was my free lunch that I got at school. And I got at school for being poor because we could not afford for me to buy lunches. So I got them for free, thankfully. Or who knows how that would have went. Just other dimensions of my childhood, I would like to say that, Christmases were great. I loved Christmas, still love Christmas to this day. One of my favorite holidays. No, it is my favorite holiday. Not one of, it is. And the reason being is because, when you're poor, you don't have a lot to eat. You definitely don't get things unless it's your birthday or Christmas. At least I didn't, I didn't get to just go in a grocery store and say, oh, I want this, or get to go to the mall and say, oh, I want this. That stuff just didn't happen. That wasn't a part of my life. Now you have online shopping. If that would have existed back then, I still wouldn't have been able to be like, oh, I saw this thing online. Anything I wanted, my mom would say, well, you'll have to get a job and buy it. Ironically, because a lot of the reason we were in the place we were in is because my mom didn't work most of my childhood. She did have a period of time where she was an assistant at the doctor's office. But, I don't remember how long that lasted. And I'm sure it certainly wasn't a great means of income because I didn't feel it, significantly contributing to our life and what we had. And another thing that I found, which really burned me up, was my sister and I were always told we were not allowed in my mom and Ricky's bedroom to stay out. And I never understood why. My mom would always say, oh, Ricky doesn't want you in there. My mom did that a lot. She would tell us we couldn't do things. And when we would ask why, she would say, because Ricky doesn't want you to do it. I can't have a friend over because Ricky doesn't want your friends here. And who knows if that's even true. a couple times when I got older, I asked Ricky about some of these things, and he denied that he was saying those things, that he said those things, that my mom was just using him because she couldn't stand up and say, she didn't want us to do it. But, we were going without food, and I remember going upstairs in her bedroom and opening her closet one day, kind of against the rules, and there were just snacks up there, Hostess cupcakes, Little Debbie's, all these snacks in her closet. And I remember being so angry and offended by this because, here I am, a teenager, and teenage boys, how teenage boys are. We're hungry. We're growing. We need to eat. Getting by a lot of days on cereal and, just not enough food to maintain my life and make me not feel hungry. And I was active too. I played sports, whether it was with the school or whether it was just after school with my friends. I was always on the go playing sports, and I was hungry, and, we didn't have food for me to eat. And then I go up there and I find hidden food in my mom and stepdad's closet. And, I was so scared and afraid because I wasn't even supposed to be in her room that I couldn't even confront her about it. And I certainly wasn't going to take it and eat it, which, hindsight being 2020, I probably could have eaten some and they would have never known. But it just hurt me and it offended me. And I couldn't believe this woman who was supposed to be taking care of me was letting me suffer while they were having good stuff. I wasn't allowed to have sodas growing up. I mean, literally my life was milk, Kool-Aid, or water. The only things I was allowed to have. And, the Kool-Aid was cheap because they were little packets that you'd pour into water and add sugar. And, milk was free from the food stamps. And obviously water was free back then. We just drank straight out of the sink. And that was a lot of reason why, My mom said it was for my health, but I just genuinely don't believe that's true. I believe it was because she just didn't want to buy sodas. She didn't want to pay the money for soda. So, yeah, that was a tough part of childhood, was just being hungry a lot. I remember that, being hungry a lot. I mean, when I graduated high school at 17, I was 6'1" and 155 pounds. And it wasn't because I wanted to be. It was because that was as big as I could get, because I didn't have the nourishment to be any bigger. And so back to the Christmas thing. One of the things I loved about my childhood was Christmas. And it wasn't necessarily because of Christmas with my mother. It was because when I went to my grandma's on Christmas, we would walk into this trailer and it would just be presents, just, 10 feet out from the tree, wrapped around the tree, 10 feet out from the tree. And, just a spread of this table of food and candy and desserts that my great grandmother would cook. She was an amazing cook. And, that died with her. That didn't really get passed on to anyone, sadly. And it was just a great time, like just opening gifts, which obviously kids love. And my grandma made sure there were plenty. They probably weren't expensive, but who cares? You're a kid opening gifts, and that's fun. And, just being full on food. Christmas is just a wonderful memory. And I will say this: one year, as an adult, I don't quite understand it, but I respect the gesture. One year, my mom and Ricky sold their truck, the only means of transportation they had to drive, to buy me and my sister 10 speeds for Christmas, along with whatever else they did with the money. I doubt that was the only thing that came out of a truck, but that certainly was what was relayed to us. Like, hey, you better take care of these 10 speeds because we sold our truck for you to get these. So, I appreciate the effort. As an adult, I wouldn't do it myself. I mean, I wouldn't get rid of my only vehicle to make sure my kids had some bicycles. It just doesn't seem logical or practical to me. I mean, you have to have a car to get around and make a living. So the 10 speeds were nice, but I don't think they were worth the cost. And eventually one day I would let a friend, Matt Orwick, borrow my 10 speed. This was, a few years later. And he was getting chased by the cops. I don't know what the heck he was doing. He was being chased by the cops sometime at night. I don't know if he was out after curfew or what exactly was happening, but the cops impounded my 10 speed. They took it. And the only way I could get it back was to go to the police station and rat on my friend, take my 10 speed and say, it was this guy who was riding my 10 speed, because I was too stupid to say, oh, my 10 speed was stolen. I wasn't smart enough to think of that. And so I lost the 10 speed. Didn't have it, after that, after a few years. And so when you consider all that, was selling a truck worth that? I don't know. But I understand the gesture, and I just didn't have people in my life who could give me guidance or advice in those situations. I mean, my mom knew that happened. I told her that I let Matt borrow the 10 speed and it got taken by the cops. But she didn't give me any guidance. I certainly wasn't going to get it from Ricky or my uncles or anyone else to say, hey, just go down and say it was stolen. You want to get it back. So I lost it. I didn't have it. And I just was always searching for some type of guidance and advice. And it was literally like, my uncle Jesse, he would sit next to me and he would crack open a beer and he would say, don't ever drink. It's bad for you. And meanwhile, he literally lived his life drunk. His motto was, if I'm not working, I'm drinking. That's how he lived his life. Uncle Russell, same way, just drunk all the time. And, doing more drugs. I wasn't present for it. I didn't see that stuff. I only know what's been told to me. I definitely know my parents, my mom and Ricky were doing drugs as well as the drinking and the weed smoking. And I was just around all this dysfunction. And it just made me feel like, all I can do is look at these people and what they're doing and the way they're acting and the things that they're doing and just realize this isn't for me. That's not the life for me. And I would use their bad behavior as a model for the way I would behave oppositely in good behavior, which is why I kind of had this, moral high ground to me of, I'm always going to be good, make good decisions, do the right thing, not put myself in a position that these guys are putting themselves in. I mean, obviously that's not even close to reality. We all end up doing things that we regret or making bad decisions in a moment, but that was what I was striving for based off that childhood and that life. I didn't have much love at home. I'm not saying my mom and grandma didn't love me, because they did. But I didn't live with my mama, and I only saw her every so often. And my mom was doing her thing most of the time, but that left me free to be and do whatever I wanted. So I played a lot of sports, and I listened to a lot of music, and I watched a lot of TV. And in listening to music and watching TV, I thought, oh, romance, love, that's the way to go in life. That's something that will make me happy. Oh, I'm gonna meet the right girl, and we're gonna fall in love, and we're just gonna live happily ever after. Did I know what that meant? No, had no idea. Did I know what it takes to do that? No, obviously not. I had no adults to look at and say, oh, they're the, couple of my dreams. When I grow up, I want to be like them. I didn't have that in my life. I just had an idea in my mind, that love was going to change everything for me in my life, that me and the girl that I love, we would just be so happy together and screw everything else and screw everybody else. And, life was going to be good that way. But it didn't turn out that way, and I will get through my love life in these episodes and what happened and how that happened. But I will say this. I will close this episode too on this. So, living the life that I lived, I almost always had a smile, positive attitude, was friendly. And, some people just couldn't figure that out. Even people in my own family couldn't figure that out. Like, why are you so happy all the time? Why are you so positive? Like, they would even make jokes that I was adopted, that I wasn't from that family because everyone else was so miserable or drowning their misery in alcohol and drugs and cigarettes. And I just didn't let that atmosphere get me down. And a large reason for that was, I knew I had goals in life. I knew I was going to go make a difference in my own life. Clearly, I wasn't going to be able to count on anyone else, but that's okay because I was going to go do it. And, I wanted to be a cop. That was the first thing I realized from that protective nature that I had developed over being unable to help my mother and, wanting to help my brother. And, I found out you can't be a cop till you're 21. Okay, well, I'm going to join the military then, because I'm not waiting till I'm 21 to do something with my life. I'm doing it immediately. I'm doing it right away. And so, all right, talk to my uncles. I had an uncle in the Army and an uncle in the Air Force. Another uncle that was in the Army, my Uncle Jimmy, was also in the Army. And I talked to all three of them. And all three of them said, join the Air Force. So, all right, two uncles that were in the Army, one in the Air Force, they're all saying join the Air Force. So that was my goal. That's what I was going to do. And I just had that in my brain. I'm going to graduate high school. I'm going to join the Air Force, become a cop, meet the woman of my dreams, and live happily ever after. And that is where I will leave episode 2. We will pick up where we left off from here on the next episode. So thanks for listening, and I will talk to you soon. Thanks for listening to my podcast. If you like this podcast, please listen to the rest of them and let me know. Go to my website, brandonheld.com. Check out my blog. Leave notes on my blog. Give me episode ideas, things you'd like to hear, or just tell me, you didn't like it and why. Tell me what you think could be better. I'm open to hearing all of it. So just go to brandonheld.com.